I'd like to welcome all of you to this. I have two roles as the director of the Trent Center for Biomaterials Research. I get to welcome all of you on behalf of the center to this, the first of, we would like to think, 4 to 6 of these conversations annually. So welcome. And at the same time, I'd like to thank Mike and particularly Narine Flower for all of the hard work in putting this together. It's really been amazing to work with Narine. She's, I think all of you RSVP to her. She's very pleasant, and she's quite a dynamo. So it's wonderful to work with Champlain College on this. Thank you. Okay, so carbon. Why do we want to talk about carbon? Well, other than the fact that if we didn't have carbon in our atmosphere, we'd all freeze to death, and that most of the living organisms around us are made of carbon, and all of our biodiversity and biomass relies on carbon, and most of our energy resources are carbon-based. It's also becoming a commodity which is at the center of large changes in our world as we know it. It's very difficult to pick up any bit of media today without feeling as if we are completely under attack as a species. Those of you who are about my age or a little bit older are really worried about your financial portfolios. We're in the middle of a financial crisis of sort. I like to say, though, that because we are in this era of crises, we tend to forget that we're also in the middle of a petroleum crisis, which all the newspapers talked about before the financial crisis hit. And just a few years ago, all the headlines screamed about food shortages. And we're told all the time that we have a crisis of climate, although we've seen massive failures at places like Copenhagen to address it. And if you look at the financial, the energy, the climate, and the food crisis, all of them has a lowest common denominator that can be identified as carbon. So it's very important for us to examine carbon as a source of solutions for all of these issues that face us. But this isn't new. If you think, as a scientist, I want to spend some time talking about history. Carbon, in one of its earliest commoditized forms, was agricultural carbon. And if you think back not so long ago, most of some of the worst atrocities in history arose out of carbon grown as tobacco and sugarcane. The slave trade and the colonialization of the Indies, where I grew up, was heavily based on agricultural carbon. And those that controlled agricultural carbon also controlled power and wealth. And that power and wealth has had significant impact on expressions of culture and music. So if you want to look at the invasion or the predominance or the existence of cultural norms and art and music of, say, Western European culture, carbon also plays a role. And agricultural carbon and control of agricultural carbon shifted somewhat over the Second World War when we heavily started using petroleum carbon. And if one looks at the countries that have access to petroleum and have control over that petroleum, one will see a very direct relationship between the quality of life and affluence of those countries related to access per capita to petroleum carbon. Of course, the story is not as simple for petroleum carbon because we know of countries like Nigeria, for example, that has petroleum carbon but has no control over that carbon by its people. So examining how we have used petroleum carbon and how we use agricultural carbon also becomes very interesting. To shift very quickly into more of a scientific commentary on carbon, we know that we are facing a climate issue. and that a lot of that climate issue have, well, let's rephrase this. Much of the solutions that we've come up with towards climate change relies on the increased use of biomass and supplantation of petroleum carbon. And it's very simple why this is the case, because if you use biomass for energy, what you're doing is you're releasing carbon that was fixed by photosynthesis to burn as energy, and that carbon goes into the atmosphere. That carbon then relies on the carbon cycle to sequester it. If you use biomass-based carbon, you can grow the next successive crop cycles or forest cycles to sequester that carbon. You provide a shunt to carbon into the atmosphere. And it's one way of abating climate change. But increasingly, we're also beginning to realize that biomass carbon, and if you think of it politically as well, biomass is one of the few commodities that are available to almost every single country across the globe. So it has been touted as a potential great equalizer in terms of access to commoditized carbon for energy and for materials. But I think that it's very important that we also sign a danger signal, that what we don't understand about biomass carbon is what are the inherent planetary limits to growth. You know, Al Slavin is here. He did a very good job talking about limits to growth just a few months ago. But we have very little understanding about how utilization of biomass will affect things like biodiversity. We have very little knowledge of what the limits to growth of biomass is related to inorganics, things like phosphorus, for example, micronutrients. Biomass simply isn't regenerative as a given. It relies on climate, of course. It relies on micronutrients. And very importantly, it relies on avoiding soil erosion and having access to water. And we know that water is one of the more scarce commodities that the world is facing as well. So what have I done in the past 4 minutes is simply raised a lot of questions about carbon. And I think this is what we want to, as a panel, do, is to point out the roles that carbon play in our really pivotal roles, that understanding how carbon interweaves into our lives, our ability to continue in the cultures that we've grown accustomed to, and with the affluence that societies like ours enjoy, and yet address those planetary boundaries, those limits to growth. That really is a conversation that could be well put by looking at carbon. So I hope that the purpose of this conversation is that the audience and the panels at each successive conversation will discuss solutions, because I'm certain I don't have those solutions to give you, but I think if we enjoy and we encourage academic discourse about this issue, we will get somewhere. And I think we need to start talking about it more. So thank you for your attention.